Welcome to the Disruptive Social Care Podcast with social care provocateur and social media queen Shirley Ayres and myself, Stuart Arnott, founder of Mindings, a service dedicated to harnessing the power of social media to help alleviate social isolation. We're delighted to welcome Dominic Campbell as our guest on the Disruptive Social Care Podcast this week. Dominic is a digital government specialist and social innovator with a background in government policy, communications and technology-led change. Dominic established FutureGov in early 2008 and has a keen interest in emerging uses of new media and social strategies to deliver public service transformation.
And looking at how technology is changing, we've had a question in from Lutz Seema about how the increase in the use of mobile technology, mobile devices, mobile internet, GPS, tracking, bring your own devices, etc., nomadic working, has influenced your design thinking. And do you have any thoughts about killer solutions?
Wow, no biggie there then.
Did elicit a lot of interest having you on the podcast, Dominic?
I have all the solutions.
One killer one will be fine.
Right, okay. This is when I pretend to be a king. So no, for me, like mobile is absolutely fundamental to everything, and it shouldn't be seen as a separate thing anymore. My designers and developers are very strict with me to not talk about it separately. You know, they talk about what's known as responsive design, which essentially means something works equally well and appropriately whichever device you're looking at it on, rather than being, you know, the classic M.dot websites where it's been specifically built to be mobile ready or whatever it might be, and that's just not necessary and not good practice anymore. So anything that we build is down that route, and because it is fundamental. In terms of the killer applications, I actually think that in terms of social care practice, nobody has actually resolved particularly well resolved the lack of connectivity in rural areas, for instance. So, you know, you may be sent out in the field with the ability to log in through Citrix on your iPad to get to your crappy case management system. You're in rural Surrey. What are you going to do about it? Like, you can hardly log in through Citrix when you're on 3G, let alone when you're in the field somewhere. So I actually think that, again, trying to apply some design thinking to mobile in a very practical sense, in a world where people aren't working in the centre of London, where connectivity is patchy, where the on and offline sync is seamless, I think is going to be something that really is going to be the next big challenge.
Funnily enough, on that point, I did some early work with when online patient records were coming in, doing some work with a company I probably shouldn't name. But we met recently and we're discussing it about how, had that gone through, it wouldn't have worked, because at the time they built it, the only mobile tool that could have been used was BlackBerry.
Right.
And the back-end system wasn't agile enough to be able to be used on iPhones at the time, and it was that lack of agility, that lack of forethought that perhaps technology will evolve beyond where we are now. So in actual fact, maybe we dodged a bullet, was what we were discussing about, because we could have had an incredible white elephant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's no doubt technology has gone through a huge leap of development, digital in particular, in the last 3 to 5 years. And again, to the last question around challenges for the next year, is how we continue to refresh and move away from that legacy, which is extremely rigid, to this much more flexible future, where hopefully you won't ever feel again that you dodged a bullet, because instead you will just be able to flex and move and develop and change, which during the e-government era of the noughties, that never really was possible.
So what do you believe is required for major transformation in publicly funded services? Trude 2 asks, why and what do you think, you've already mentioned some of them, but I'm sure there are more, are the barriers to developing new ways of working within local government? How can they be broken? And is there scope for new thinking in the public sector? Or does it have to come from outside?
So for me, I find that most of my life is empowering people on the inside of the system to just have a voice and to let their ideas be known. we're trying a couple of new things at the moment around inside versus outside change. So we have this 3-year partnership with Surrey, where we've created this thing called Shift Surrey, which is essentially an innovation lab within County Hall in Surrey. And you may think that sounds like an oxymoron, having an innovation lab in a county hall, but actually it is.
Monmouthshire are doing it. They've got an innovation lab up there.
Exactly. And as a result, given where the spend goes, the majority of the innovation going on is adults and children's social care in those labs, obviously. And in that, what we're doing is essentially creating a conveyor belt of entrepreneurs within the council to come through with ideas and challenges and needs and requirements to come into what is a white space, very sort of startup style, to think creatively and differently. And Surrey are really good at backing their frontline workers to take time out to come and do that, rather than just assuming that they haven't got time, they can't come away from the front line. I think, as we were talking about earlier, it's about how you manage that and about how you support that, which is really fundamentally important from a leadership point of view. And then we're about to, in terms of external innovation, we're about to launch a thing called Hub Launchpad with the guys at Hub Westminster, which is all about trying to find those entrepreneurs, take them out of their environment, give them inspiration, new tools, new ways of doing innovation, and then essentially injecting that innovation back into their organisation and hoping it can spread within the organisation when they go back there, because not every council, not every area is as willing as Surrey and Monmouthshire and others to create their own innovation lab, but also taking a time out away from your organisation to think fundamentally differently and bring something very different back is hopefully going to be useful to them.
I love the term entrepreneur. Just in case anybody hasn't heard about that before, just explain, because I think it's a great concept to encourage people within large organisations to innovate.
Yeah, I mean, there are heroes. There's no way, I left local government to change local government. There's no way I could do that or even hope to do that if there weren't people still in local government who have the kind of fiery passion and the ability to work through with around the system to actually open some little trapdoors to help us crawl through, to actually make change happen. And those people we tend to call entrepreneurs, the guys who, for all intents and purposes, could be sat on my side of the organisational divide. There's only a wafer-thin divide between whether I'm inside or outside of local government, and equally it's the same for them. And we need one another to hold hands across that organisational boundary to make that change happen. So it's quite codependent in that way.
And interestingly, maybe it's just an aside, I don't know, but the number of people of those entrepreneurs who I've met who've invited me to come in and present mindings to them, they've nearly always been women.
That is interesting. Yeah. No, I think there's some interesting gender politics going on in local government right now. I think if we can get the right people in the right places, I'm quite confident that change can happen. It's interesting that some of the most fundamental change is going on in places that are led by women. So coincidental, maybe, probably not, because we're talking about, a new wave of collaborative, non-sort of top-down change type of creating a space for people to explore change and explore new opportunities. And I think generally, and I catch myself as a man doing this regularly, and trying to avoid it is not to jump to solutions, not to impose solutions, and actually give things time to breathe and understand and succeed or not, and work from there.
Well, technology is an enabler of more innovative and creative connections and collaborations, and yet connected care is still only an aspiration rather than a reality. Feel free to disagree with me on that. But generally, as a generalisation it is. Health Be Me has asked for your views on the barriers to engaging people with using new health and care innovations.
That's quite a broad one. I would say where we're at is that I haven't come across, and correct me, I would love to hear if I'm wrong, but I haven't come across a coherent tech-led or even tech-infused change strategy within a social care, just even in a social care department, let alone on a sort of geographic basis, understanding care in its widest sense, from, tea club through to care home through to social worker. And I think that strategy needs to exist. It doesn't need to be complex. It just needs to be fairly well framed, and has to talk about what is it that the practitioner needs to do, or what does the practitioner need to do their job more effectively? Question. Quite simple. Work from the practitioner backwards, put those building blocks in place. Equally, what are the barriers to clients engaging differently with services, and how do we actually overcome some of those? Is it super fast broadband or a smart TV, or is it actually that stuff doesn't matter so much, and the technology should just be enabler for them to like, the technology should just get out the way, do its job, connect people, and then not really play a role, just as a way that people can come together and talk. I mean, you talked about Casserole earlier. Technology within that is nothing other than a matchmaking service. Like 90% of the service is somebody cooking a meal, walking around the corner, delivering it to an older person and having a chat. That's nothing to do with technology. So it's understanding like where it plays a role and where it doesn't. But without this kind of broader strategy around what is the vision for social care in an area, and where does technology have a role and where does it not have a role, I think it's a real struggle right now. And
the scaling of Casserole has got nothing to do with technology.
No.
In fact, isn't there a strategy, I think, here in the DigiAge you actually spoke about it, it's because every different local authority has different rules of engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And with everything we do, just like with Patchwork, it's around politics, it's around power structures, it's around communications channels, it's around enthusiasm. And ultimately, the technology just has to be good enough and do its job. And then beyond that, it's how do you win arguments and make change happen, really.
We've often discussed the problem with the way that new services are currently commissioned, and a pertinent question from Sarah McKee. Will we see innovation as long as the same services are commissioned for less? And what would be your number one recommendation for commissioners who are listening to the podcast?
I think that's a great question, and something that I think all of us probably who are trying to innovate in this sector think about an awful lot. I have to say that the trick I've kind of won with organisations recently is that if they're not willing to fundamentally change the way they commission, that they at least allow people like us the space to prove what innovation could look like. So I'll give an example. Recently we went for a tender for a children's system where we went along and we presented Patchwork, knowing that it wasn't the answer, but it was much more about the story and the fact that we credibly had delivered government secure modern technology in open standards in a way that was in line with the way even the Cabinet Office does it these days through Government Digital Service and other people, in an agile, developed way, where you build essentially from scratch based around needs and build on top of that. Unsurprisingly, we were kind of left out the room because other people in the room were there with their big, robust systems that had been around for a decade and la 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 la. Get a phone call not that long afterwards saying, yeah, we kind of get what you mean. Yeah, that's probably the right approach because none of these really meet our needs. And we were like, great, so we're going to talk about this, right? And the answer was no. You're well done. You're doing the right thing for the future, but we're going to buy one of these, even though we know it's not the right thing for the solution.
What was the contract worth?
Oh, it was $1 million plus anyway.
Oh,
and so they were knowingly buying something that wasn't fit for purpose now, let alone for the future. Whereas what I've done with a couple of people recently is actually to say, at minimum, when you're commissioning something, can you at least allow us to, on a very sort of shoestring budget, allow us to prototype what the solution might look like. So if you give people 6 months to return their tenders, at the same time give us 6 months to build a prototype solution as to what it could look like. And if you do nothing else, when the suppliers come in, put it up on a presentation and say, does your system do this? Is it as attractive and easy to use as this? Is it as effective as this, even though this is just a prototype? And if they can't meet your vision, then have the confidence as commissioners to say, okay, we're going to take what is seen as a risk, which is we're going to build instead of buy, because we got into this endless. Sometimes a product fits your needs perfectly, or good enough. Buy it when it's good enough. If it really isn't an overlap with your Venn diagram, then just do not bother. Have the confidence to say, let's partner with someone who can build this for us, and build it in our vision. Because, these old arguments of CIOs that building costs way more than buying, it's just not true anymore. And also, do you need a bells and whistles system all the time? How much of your case management system do you just never go into? Just like how much of Word do you never use? And why not just build something that is what you need to do the job and nothing more? And that would be my advice to commissioners. Really, try and eke out some of that innovation space. If you insist on following traditional procurement, do that with this almost innovation thing on the side, where you could almost pay 5 suppliers, say, even if they're already existing in the market, to prototype and prove that either they can adapt their system to meet your needs, or they can build something from scratch that meets your needs. But
I think that's wonderful, and I know you touched on Kent Educare as well, and this is my one fear about these austere times, is that, I don't know if it was ever like this, but in theory, commission 10 in the hope that 1 or 2 of them would work out, because I certainly know that one of the paths to great innovation is permission to fail.
Absolutely, yeah.
And because that process of failure is where all the learning is, all the learning.
Yeah.
And so you've got to build these things, and I'd love to see that. And that would be a great thing for entrepreneurs and for developers if there was lots of these seed corn budgets around there. We could live on a seed corn budget for 12 months and do some amazing development, building great, agile, fit for purpose systems.
Absolutely.
Based on that. So it doesn't even have to be hugely expensive.
Yeah, and I think often that local government doesn't understand the really important role it has to play in market making. It assumes that it's a passive recipient of a market of systems that come from hugely well-funded organisations that are so abstract from the front line of public services, and generally have just crowbarred a CRM system that was developed for an online shoe company into being fit for purpose to do call centre work for adult social care. And that doesn't have to be that way. They can create the market and influence the market without spending a lot of money.
2 things that occur to me, actually. One is that possibly we need to support commissioners to be more adventurous, and maybe we should think about having a session with commissioners to get them excited about what the potential is. And the second point mentioned at Kent Educare, and we've all mentioned it, this importance of having access to seed funding. It doesn't have to be huge amounts of money, but to encourage that, the learning, the development, because one of my comments to a lot of funders, the real challenge is they're not sharing the learning. There's millions and millions of pounds being spent on innovative responses, tech responses, but it's very hard to actually take the learning. And that's one of the conversations I'm having with a lot of funders at the moment. How do we find a way of sharing that learning?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways, we helped Camden put together their social innovation fund, for instance, and one of our key recommendations in that was do not allow anybody you have funded to not blog, to not share the ins and outs of their projects as they go. It must just become the norm. And if we've developed a product in Patchwork that is having some traction in the market and is solving some problems, I really hope. And that came from a position of us going, we know there's a problem here. Who wants to talk about it, and taking it from there. So if we've managed to do that from a position of entire openness all the way along, then it just should be the norm.
Yeah, great knock on it. I just saw a video on BBC News the other day. I'll put the link out, and it was for Camden Sheds, which is a lovely innovation. Another event I was at, one of the chaps from there presented before me, and just everyone was crying. It was just such a lovely, lovely concept. But kind of spin-off from that was there was a makers fair at Camden Shed, and a friend of mine went there, and that was wonderful because there was a lot of young people coming along with all the gizmos, and a lot of the older people there who had the skills to fix them. And that was a lovely, cross-demographic, which I don't think was one of the set outcomes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I mean, and equally with Casserole, we never, believe it or not, it was never intended necessarily as an intergenerational thing that solved some nutrition problems in older people Fundamentally, I came at it from quite a hard perspective of Meals on Wheels is crap and it costs a lot of money and I want to fix it. But all this other stuff that's come out of it in terms of tackling social isolation, intergenerational mixing, improved nutrition for older people is awesome. And I think that is the crux of a lot of these new innovations, really, whether it's in Camden or wherever, in that you set off down what is a great path and a great idea, but all these unintended brilliant consequences come of it if you're open to them.
And you've got to push away all the, but what if other people got to be CRB checked? What happens if the kitchen's inspected? What if somebody has a peanut allergy?
Oh yeah, we've had all that fun for sure. We've lost the CRB one, but we so everyone who becomes a cook now is DBS checked, as they now call it. But what we had a FutureGov Hack Week week before last, where we, just as a team of 25, came together and worked on 3 ideas, of which one was, how do we fix the DBS system? How do we go beyond? And we obviously recognise it's a useful gateway, because if you have a criminal record, you're not going to essentially try to get past that system because you won't be able to. So it's a good way of filtering a certain tiny percentage of the population out, potentially. But on top of that, it's retrospective only. It's not future gazing, and also misses all sorts of peripheral activity and personality traits and whatever else. So what we're trying to move towards is to build on some of this really great sort of social network analysis stuff around how, who do you know, and this person through this person and all that kind of stuff, which will actually be far more powerful down the path, I think, because then, as with all the best technology, it's empowering you to use your brain. It's not giving you a yes or no answer. If we'd built Patchwork in a way that was very rules-based, that said Patchwork knows better than you as a human being what information you can and can't share with this other human being, it would have broken immediately, because it would either share too much or too little information. And so what I think is fundamental around this new wave of technology is, how do you connect people so that they can engage their brains and do the thinking and share the right amount of information with the right person? Or say, yes, I'm happy for that person to cook for me because it's a friend of a friend of a friend, or whatever it might be.
So, an amusing tweet from Jax Rafferty, asking if you'd like to share your air miles. And on a more serious note, FutureGov are now working internationally. So how would you compare and contrast the different approaches to social innovation in the UK, America and Australia?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting time the last couple of years on that front. So in America, where I was living in Washington, D.C. on and off for 3 years up until last summer, and on the one hand, I never really had the opportunity to give it a good old push as I wanted to, because we were doing okay here at the time. I ended up doing an awful lot of remote working. But nevertheless, the work that we tried to do out there, it was difficult, as Brits, actually, we found at the time, because America does have this not invented here mentality, actually, which was surprising to me. They were very willing to listen to the bright ideas of a Brit with a nice accent and pay for a day's consultancy to essentially download my brain. What they found harder was when there were ideas that came out of that, they would turn around and go, oh, great, that's a really brilliant idea. Let's find someone in Baltimore who can build this for us. And I'd be like, oh, it's kind of our idea, and I'd quite like to build a company in the US. But so I found, from a Brit's point of view, it was very challenging. And that contrasts quite markedly to Australia, actually, where we're doing really well. And Patchwork's now implemented in 5 councils in Melbourne. It's going to be, fingers crossed, more than that during the autumn. And possibly New South Wales as well as we're in talks around Casserole being used for possibly a different purpose, possibly around dog walking and gardening matchmaking rather than cooking. Well, exactly, it's repurposable across all of the interests. So that's great. And Australia almost has the opposite problem in that it assumes if something hasn't been invented in Australia, it's better than if it has been invented in Australia, which is fine, but a bit odd, really. But in terms of the wider point around their approach to social innovation, I think America suffers a little bit from its flashness. It is often looking for the sort of golden bullet, big ticket, high marketing, Silicon Valley mindset sort of social innovation. And I think that holds it back. I think it's actually quite impenetrable to human beings. And I think it's generally not especially in the social sector, it's fine you've got 300 million people to get to use your event system or whatever. You only need 10 million of them and you're very rich. When you're talking about a niche community of people who have different challenges around access and the way they engage with technology, and you're trying to, I don't know, maximize micro-volunteering for care or whatever it might be, it actually involves an awful lot of change management and an awful lot of hand-to-hand combat on the ground. Whereas I think from what I've come across, it's actually the community development community in America that does that really well, but they're not so great at technology. So there's a bit of a disconnect. There's the flashy Silicon Valley tech, and then there's the very community-based, effective work that isn't community-driven. And then in Australia, I find them probably the best of all three in terms of Britain, Australia, and America. In that they are creative, they are craving innovation, they still have some budget, unlike the rest of the world, because they just dig another hole in Western Australia to pay for it. But also, so that gives them some flexibility, but also they're very pragmatic and managerial about how they do it. Politics doesn't really get into local government too much over there. And so they're very good at just understanding the business case for an innovation and making it happen.
Mm.
Considering the size of the country, they've got quite impressive rural broadband as well.
Yeah, even more so. Whichever government gets in September, they're going to be pushing big on that in the next couple of years.
So thank you, Dominic. To end the interview, I'd like to invite you to share with us all your Follow Friday recommendations.
Wow. Given that I follow an awful lot of people, I would say in this sector, in the health and social care sector, where I get all of my sort of frontline passion and grit and interest from on Twitter is our favourite Ermintrude, who asked us a question earlier, as well as the secret social worker. They're my two fave follows, and I'm sure you've mentioned this a ton of times before, but they're great to follow. And then in terms of the leadership angle, we run a site called Tweety Hall that has a Twitter list of chief execs around the country who are tweeting, and that's generally something I'll dip into every day as well to see sort of that helicopter view of how people are viewing change in the sector. So, but anyone who's asked me a question today, it was kind of not that surprising. I'm looking at my hand as well. Oh, my outlier, which isn't anything to do with this, is you've got to follow BuzzFeed. If you don't follow BuzzFeed, and just for a bit of comedy value, yeah, exactly, yes. For comedy value, that like helps me through the day. But yeah, in terms of the more intelligent input, it's those other guys are fantastic.
Thank you. Oh, really eclectic mix there. Thank you, Dominic. And well, that's us. That's it from us this time. We hope you enjoyed it. We certainly did. And we'd like to ask you to help us spread the word. And remember, you can follow me at Shirley Ayres.
You can follow me at Dominic Campbell.
And you can follow me at Minding Stew. Now, come visit us at disruptivesocialcare.com, where you can see all of our previous shows, and also on our Facebook page at facebook.com/disruptivesocialcare. Until next time.
Bye-bye.